Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a full-on spoiler for Thor Love and Thunder. Now if you want to check out my non-spoiler reviews, I will leave some links within the description. You can check those out at a later date. But this video will be far more of a free moving discussion as to what I felt worked best and what I felt didn't work quite as well within the overall movie. So there'll be no chronological order throughout this. So this is your final warning now, spoilers for Thor Love and Thunder in 3, 2, 1. So the first point I want to talk about is the handling of Gorr the God Butcher. Now, we were all excited when Christian Bale was taking on this role here, as we thought he would bring his usual intensity and serious brooding nature to this overall film, perhaps giving us one of the best villains of Marvel recently after Avengers Endgame and Thanos. But that sadly wasn't the case here, as again, Gorr just turned out to be a very generic and bland and one-note villain overall. But in terms of the few scenes that I felt were the best throughout this film, they probably all featured Gorr, to be honest with you. And when we look at the opening sequence of this movie, where we see Gorr on a desert with his daughter dying of thirst, I liked how this sequence was handled. I liked all the cinematography and the tone and the atmosphere of the music. And when you watch this scene to begin with, you thought, well, hang on a minute, we could actually be onto something quite good here in terms of building a substantial antagonist, understanding his overall motivations. And this sequence played out for a good 5 to 10 minutes as his daughter, I feel, passes away. And then he hears voices calling out to him as he leads to some sort of oasis, and then when he bumps into this god figure and he talks about the necro sword, and Gorr is pleading out to him for very much his acknowledgement. He deemed him to be some sort of prophesied god to deliver the lost people, and the god is just mocking and laughing at him. And this is really most symbolic of the film itself. This is where we get potentially a serious, very impactful moment, and then it's completely undercut by the overall comedic tone. And this is something that would last throughout the entire movie. And just the way that Christian Bale was delivering his lines and his dialogue, it just came across as very hokey and very campy, and just took away all of the serious threat from Gorr himself. And it's such a shame here, because again, I think Gorr could have been a very good villain throughout this entire film. Now, I did like the ending scene where we have Gorr in the final confrontation against Thor, and he's asking Thor to look after his daughter. Again, they really did lend much more of the emotional weight throughout this sequence here, as Thor remarks to Gorr that it's all about love and having love for one another. That's what's most important. And this is when Gorr asks Thor to look after his daughter. Now, I did question this sequence only because I felt, what was the main reason for Thor really having to look after Gorr's daughter? Why didn't he just hand her over to many of the other kids within New Asgard? Throughout the whole entire franchise, we've never seen Thor show any kind of parental capabilities, and there was certainly nothing throughout this film to suggest that he could have carried out those parental duties. I didn't understand why exactly Gorr was trusting Thor with looking after his daughter. But as a sequence overall, it was handled very well. So next up, we're going to talk about the Guardians of the Galaxy just quickly, and all of the hype way back when this movie was released, because of course we were following on from the end results of Avengers Endgame when the Guardians took off with Thor to have further adventures. How prominent would they be within this installment? The fact is, they're only in it for about 5 minutes. We get a quick montage where we get the narration from Korg at the beginning of the film talking about Thor having these adventures with the Guardians as he's getting himself back into shape. And then there's this one encounter, and it's so over very quickly. In the beginning part of the film, where Thor is taking on these various monsters who are on these kind of speed mod bikes, and we have the Guns N' Roses soundtrack playing in the beginning. I think it was Welcome to the Jungle. And it's more about Thor really showcasing all of his abilities. The Guardians are kind of just hanging back, just watching him do his thing. So they weren't really prominent, and I did really wonder what was the point of having the Guardians in there to begin with. There wasn't even any hints as to what further adventures that they would have. No further set up for their third film, which I believe is still coming out in 2023. The most that we got here, they had some distress signals highlighting the fact that Gorr was causing all of this chaos. And when they were looking at the various video footage, this is when Thor saw Sif, that she was in danger, and then this is when the Guardians and Thor went their separate ways. So really, they're only in it about 5 minutes overall, not really any much point. Again, it didn't do nothing to hurt the movie. Maybe they didn't want the Guardians to dominate too much of the story, but I just think if you're going to have the Guardians, who of course are such a mainstay within the MCU at this point, it'd be far better to have them in some sort of substantial arc. We then follow on from this, and I just want to talk quickly about Sif, who's played by Jamie Alexander. Of course, we all know her. She's been prominent throughout the franchise ever since the first movie, when she was part of the Warriors, who we all know are substantial supporting cast members within the Thor mythology. Now, going back to Thor Ragnarok, all of the Warriors were quickly and swiftly wiped out by Hela in that movie. So in this case here, we see Thor catching up to Valhalla, where he sees that Sif has been heavily damaged throughout battling against Gorr. Again, it would have been nice if we actually saw this battle sequence play out. And then we see that Sif has lost her arm in the fight and that she can't die and go to Valhalla because she's not yet dead. I just think this is further disrespect to the character of Sif. I think Jamie Alexander is a competent actress, and it just seems that she's just coming in to all of these appearances as just really cameos and nothing more. She also made an appearance in the Loki season, if you remember, and again, that was nothing special. So I just think we're underutilising this character. So at this point, I just think if you're not going to do anything with her, just either kill her off or don't have her appear in any further installments. We then talk about one of the most substantial characters throughout this film, and that was Jane Foster, of course. Now, as we all know, when covering this film, when it was announced at San Diego Comic-Con that she would indeed be playing Lady Thor, as we all know from the comic books, there was this huge wave of scrutiny. First off, because Natalie Portman, when she held the hammer at the announcement, she looked very small, very petite, and she's always been this way anyway. So many people were questioning how would she exactly bulk up to represent the character who, if you see for the comic books, is far more of that lean, muscular physique. Many others, of course, were worrying that this would be yet again a further example of the supposed MCU. This is something I don't believe in, and I've done a video on this, and you can check out within my channel. But they felt again we were going to see another example of an iconic male character be dominated and superseded by the female version. Now, happily, that wasn't the case at all, and I said in my non-spoiler review, I think Natalie Portman did very well in the role as Jane. She's prominent, yes, and they do very much hint at the cancer storyline, but she doesn't supersede Thor. Thor is still dominant for the most part. She's there very much to support his role, and they do spend a good amount of time building on their relationship. I think overall she looked very good in the costume. I think it was, again, a good faithful recreation of the comic book source material. Now, one big question going into this film was how exactly they were going to handle her cancer storyline. Of course, this is something you would deem that would be a serious narrative amongst all of the comedic tone that we saw within the trailers. And to be honest, I don't think they handled it quite as well as what they should have done. We had little moments and little scenes. So we had one scene where we saw Jane having a flashback in terms of her mother, who indeed herself had cancer. I believe this was in the first quarter of the movie, where after an initial battle we see Jane go into the bathroom and she's wielding Mjolnir, and then that's when she has the flashback through the mirror. This is where we see her very much suffering under the sheer weight of wielding Mjolnir, and we later on learn from Thor that the Mjolnir is actually draining her power away. But again, as we saw with Gorr, anytime we wanted to lend some emotional weight in terms of Jane suffering, we would always cut away to some sort of one-liner or more humorous moment, whether it would be from Crowe or whether it would be from Valkyrie. So again, this was a missed opportunity to add a lot of dramatic impact to the overall cancer storyline. And one thing I didn't understand was how exactly Jane was connected to Mjolnir. Now, they tried to explain this, but I don't think they did a very good job. So basically what happened here is that during her chemotherapy in hospital, Jane was reading up on all of the Norse mythology books, and she came across the discovery of Mjolnir, and she found out its location, which was in New Asgard. I wasn't quite sure how exactly it found its way to New Asgard, because if you remember from Thor Ragnarok, Mjolnir was shattered by Hela as Thor and Loki was fighting her, and I believe this was in a separate location rather than New Asgard. So you mean to tell me that somebody found the remnants of Mjolnir and managed to put them together in a little museum? Nobody tried to put Mjolnir back together. It didn't call out to anybody else. It just called out to Jane. It didn't really make sense. And this was something I was always querying in the beginning when they announced Jane Foster's involvement. How exactly was she going to come into contact with Mjolnir and also start wielding it? And we've just bypassed that completely. She just comes across Mjolnir, she studies it for a bit, and then the next thing we know, we're in New Asgard when Thor arrives, and then Jane is all up in the armor with Mjolnir wielding it. We then had more focus on the relationship between Thor and Jane. We had this 5 to 10 minute sequence where we had the whole backstory of Thor and Jane getting together, and it was very much done in a TV reality style, as we see them meeting together and then moving in together and then attending all of these fancy dress parties and spending time at home with one another, laughing and joking and being happy. Now, the one thing I question here is, when exactly did this happen within the Marvel timeline? Because if we follow through the actual Thor movies itself, yes, there was a point when Thor and Jane were together, but they never had this truly concentrated period when they were living together and being happy. I guess if it happened, it must have been in the period between Thor the Dark World and Thor Ragnarok. Probably shortly before Thor came into contact with Surtur in the opening scene of that movie, there was some sort of period of calm as Thor was spending time with Jane. We then talk about Russell Crowe and Zeus, and this was of course the detour that we had when the heroes went to Olympus, or that Olympian city, in order to warn Zeus about the incoming threats of Gorr the Butcher. And for some reason Zeus wasn't paying heed at all to Thor's warnings. We had this weird dialogue where he recognises the threat of Gorr, but he didn't want anybody to panic within his city. As one would have thought, being the god of lightning, that Zeus would have been far more on his toes and on the ball in terms of the threat presented by Gorr, but no, he just simply ignores it. And for the most part, everybody on this Olympian city was more about having the parties and orgies, which he mentioned a couple of times. And to be honest, this whole sequence, when we really look at it, really could have been taken out. It doesn't really add anything to the overall story. Zeus ignores Thor's warnings, as I mentioned before. We had that fight sequence where Thor is captured, and then they break free and they start taking down all of his forces, and then Thor throws the lightning bolt through Zeus. We think he's dead at the time. Again, that was very much of a strange moment. Why does Zeus just get killed from that one moment by Thor, and then they just fly away? So this whole detour in terms of this Olympian city could have really been taken out for something far more substantial. I wasn't a massive fan of Russell Crowe and his accent. Again, this is just silliness and very much encompassing the whole tone of the entire movie, and it just seemed to drag on forever, this whole entire sequence. And it really was at this stage of the movie where we're jumping around all over the place, visiting all of these different planets. The idea of Gorr kidnapping the kids and keeping them in this cage, and Thor was able to do these kind of psychic Skype calls where he was able to talk to them without being there really. And again, this was part of the issue that I had in terms of Thor, where he was really doing this kind of stand-up comedy routine, just the way he was talking to the kids, constantly making all of these jokes and wisecracks. None of it was really funny, and something where you have the kids being kidnapped by the villain, that is something that really should generate a lot of tension and dread and jeopardy, but it had none of those throughout this entire movie itself. And then we go on to the climatic battle where Thor catches up with Gorr, where he's trying to open up the gate to talk to Eternity. We all know Eternity is very much of a big entity within Marvel Comics, and I thought visually he looked very good where we saw him within the statues, and then we later on saw him again in that climatic moment where he had far more of that space galaxy silhouette. And I thought visually this was a very good representation. Now the only reason I'm excited whenever I hear the mention of Eternity or Death or the Watcher is because I get hyped up that one day we will eventually see a Silver Surfer movie. That's something I've been waiting for massively amount ever since the MCU arrived and they acquired the rights of the Fantastic Four. As you all know, he's very integral to that overall franchise. So hopefully down the line, where we get these various hints to the Watchers and the other gods and Eternity, we will later on see Silver Surfer some way within the universe. I also questioned the way that Thor was able to transmit his energy and charge them into the kids, and then we had that very chaotic sequence when the kids were just bouncing around using all of the energy and fighting off all the monsters. Again, this is another strange sequence. Why did you put this into play? You could have had a far more tense sequence where we just had Thor and Jane fighting together all of these monsters on their own. I didn't quite see what they were trying to go for in terms of having the energy transferred through the kids. Maybe they're trying to set up future Asgardian warriors later on down the line. If we get a fifth installment, maybe there'll be a sequence where somebody picks up the mantle of Thor and they can pick that up, and they'll tie that into this overall fight sequence as to how they were able to wield Thor or indeed Stormbreaker. And then we come to the end of the movie, which is probably again the most emotional segment of the film, where we see Jane Foster passing away. As the powers of Mjolnir finally get to her, she fades away into the background, and then this is when Thor makes the decision to care for Gorr's daughter. We see them in the room together on the ship. She's given Thor lots of attitude, and then we see them emerge on the beach as they go to have further heroic adventures together, as they leap up into the sky with more Guns N' Roses music playing in the background. Now, I thought initially when Natalie Portman was coming back in the role as Jane, I thought she was going to be far more of a permanent fixture. Why would she come back for one movie? We all know that she was very unhappy in terms of playing the character, especially after Patty Jenkins was set to direct the second film and then she was replaced with Alan Taylor. So I thought if you're going to get Natalie Portman back, it would be for a couple of films, but to just bring her in for this one particular movie, again, it just felt a bit inconsequential and kind of pointless, despite the fact that Natalie Portman did very good within the role. So we then go on to the end credit scenes, and we had two of them, and again both of them were pretty meaningless in my point of view. The first one where we saw Zeus being recovered from being struck down by the lightning bolt by Thor, and he's talking about getting revenge on Thor, Odin's son, and this is when we see the emergence of Hercules. For me, this wasn't a big deal at all. Like, I know there's been comic book source material where Thor does take on Hercules, But really, Hercules, that's all they could come up with. That's not really a big substantial threat in my own personal opinion. There are so many other characters within Thor's universe and mythology, and they pick Hercules if we do indeed get a 5th movie, so that didn't really get me excited at all. And in the second end credit scene, we had Jane showing up in Valhalla at the end, being greeted by Heimdall, who's played by Idris Elba. So maybe we may see a return of Jane Foster later on down the line. This is the Thor 3-1, this is the Marvel Universe, and because we've introduced all of the multiverse concepts, there's multiple ways of bringing somebody back to life after they've passed away. So it wouldn't really surprise me if we saw the re-emergence of Natalie Portman as Lady Thor. If not in the 4th film, then maybe in some other installment, maybe another movie, or indeed another Disney Plus show. So that's it really in terms of my overall spoiler review of Thor Love and Thunder. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, they just overdid it in terms of the comedy and the humour. We knew this already because they were going to double down on the tone of Ragnarok, but it just feels like such a lazy and half-hearted effort, and we could have had something truly special. Again, if we get a 5th Thor film, and that's probably dependent on how well the box office performance is of this movie, and given the popularity of the character itself, and of course the good reception of Thor Ragnarok, it wouldn't surprise me if this performs very well at the box office and we do indeed get a 5th installment. But I think we need a change of director and also a change of vision if Thor is going to be everlasting within the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe. So let me know what you thought about this movie in the comments, and of course when we come to the overall box office performance of this film in terms of its opening weekend, I'll provide commentary on that, and also probably some more additional thoughts on where Marvel exactly is going within their phase 4. Is there a lack of direction? Is there a lack of focus? Are they saturating their fans with the continuing content on both the movies and also the Disney Plus shows? We'll have a further debate and discussion on that, so look out for that in the future within the channel. Please also hit the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay in safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.